Welcome back to the AAPI Leadership Lab. Today we have Aaron Diec, the owner of Tian Beverage Distributor. Aaron, how are you doing today?
Very well. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you again for taking the time out of your busy day to tell us a little bit about your story. So just jumping right in, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? A little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Just so people can get a little bit to know you a little bit better.
Sure. I'm Aaron Diec, born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. My parents and my family are refugees from Vietnam. Basically escaped and was sponsored by a church family in Birmingham. So I was born and raised in Birmingham and moved out to Vegas with the majority of my family in the early 90s. So we've been here since then and seen the transition within the city. Kind of worked my way up after school in hospitality and then ultimately into owning and operating a distribution business for beverages.
Nice. So going back, what was it like? Well, for one, we were talking about it a little bit in the pre-show and love to get a little bit more into the story of your family, how you ended up in Birmingham, because it was interesting. If without some little bit of luck and a lot of resiliency, that you might not be with us.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about your background and then maybe what it was like to grow up in the South as a minority.
Yeah, if everything didn't fall into place the way that it did, I definitely wouldn't exist. I wouldn't have had the family that I have with the children that I have, et cetera. It's pretty wild to actually sit back and think about that because I had the luxury of visiting some of the folks that had such a crucial role in kind of teaching my family. I'm talking registering and enrolling for school, teaching them how to drive in America, teaching them English, helping them get their citizenship, things like that. So it was pretty crazy of a story, but I think it's a testament to how I'm wired now. I'm a very motivated individual, not afraid to roll my sleeves up. A title is a title. It doesn't really matter. I'm more, if it needs to be done, I don't necessarily just wait for my staff to do it. We step in and we team up and get it done. So it's, I think that for my family to see the opportunity and see that, small window of time that presented itself for them to leave the situation that they were in and take a chance. Personally, I don't think that they knew what the end result was going to be. I thought, just looking back and dissecting it, I felt like they were looking at that as as an opportunity to leave, and then just roll with the punches and take it a step at a time. My dad tells me that all the time, especially with owning a business. Just take it a step at a time, fall forward, do it the right way, be kind, earn respect of your peers, and just keep moving. So, for them to be fortunate enough to escape, and then the boat was sinking, literally like Gilligan's Island type stuff. So. And as I was telling you, they were just fortunate to have a U.S. Navy liner rescue everyone. No one was harmed. Maybe some seasickness here and there from everybody, in the waters, but other than that, there was no serious injuries. I was able to, because it was all over the news back in the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to actually locate images of the boat that they were on, the family.
Wow.
And I found the image of the U.S. Navy liner that rescued everybody, and I put it together for a mural for a tattoo, and it's on my right leg. And
Cool.
I remember showing it to my family, and I think that was finally when they kind of accepted the fact that I was into art and tattoos. As you see, it's on my arms. I think when I showed them that piece, instantly it was all of a sudden, oh, tattoos are cool. Everything is good with accepting that art form, so, I think it's a pretty wild circumstance to be in. And, like you mentioned, if those things didn't fall into place the right way, we wouldn't be talking. It just wouldn't be. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so crazy, right? Like my parents didn't have to go through as much as yours did. That was a lot. And it's a sign of the times, right? What was going on at the time. But it sounds like the same mentality is we don't want to take for granted the sacrifice that our parents went through to give us this opportunity. And so we'll get into some of your business and some of the things you've done, and some of the impacts you've had. But I want to go back a little bit to, so what was it like to grow up? So yeah, you said you grew up partly in Alabama, partly in Las Vegas. But what was it like? Because I know I've talked to people who grew up in the South, and when they grew up, they didn't know they were minorities until someone would say something. So what was that experience for you, and how has that maybe impacted your work ethic and the way you approach things today?
I think Asian families in the South in the the late 70s and early 80s, definitely not a common thing. I remember having to go on road trips just to go to Asian supermarkets to buy rice, and buy marinades and things like that. And learning that at a young age, that it wasn't like just going down to the local grocery store to buy groceries, like there were certain foods and stuff, obviously cultural vegetables and meats and things like that, that we had to travel. I remember we had to drive into other, states. Atlanta was one of those areas, in Georgia that, that had a little bit more diversity.
Mm-hmm.
So, I grew up thinking that we were one and the same with everyone until I realized that we really weren't. All my friends were white or black. And I was accepted in most circumstances. Obviously, as a kid, you don't know when someone is teasing or making fun of your background until you kind of realize that, oh, wow, that was kind of a little over the top or a little bit extra or what have you. But I think that having that, with the fact that, we're sports nuts. And I think that the sport aspect of everything kind of is a glue. But with sports, in Alabama, there's no pro teams. So it's all colleges. So the biggest thing that stands out is Alabama and Auburn. We're talking like violent rivalries. So, we were Alabama fans. We were taught that. So it's in my blood. But I have relatives that are still in Alabama that are Auburn fans, and it's a very interesting dynamic when you get everybody together for sure. But it's an interesting thing because I learned a lot of, like just growing up, life lessons and things like that from the friends that I had. So when I moved out here to Vegas, it was another shell shock because it didn't make as much sense. Like we're talking, sorry, he got back in here. This is my little guy, Toro. He's our warehouse security. So he's just making sure I'm okay here. But, so when we moved out here, I remember just doing anything athletically, I could keep up with everything, but not good enough athletically. And then I remember moving out here and going to PE and, in elementary school, and I was running around everybody and playing dodgeball and nobody could hit me with the ball. And it just kind of clicked that it's something in the water in the South, like, with sports and things like that. I think the rest of the country has caught up, but for the most part, it's pretty wild to actually kind of break that down. But definitely interesting. You deal with adversity. I think you kind of have to embrace circumstances and then just kind of move forward. So I think that when I look back, it definitely helped me with business and executing on the level that we are right now. So
yeah, and so you talked a little bit about the transition to Vegas. So what was it like growing up in Vegas then? It was, I call it like the early part of Vegas because the boom really happened while you were growing up here. So what was that like seeing maybe even Vegas become more diversified during your time here?
I think the biggest takeaway was the sheer convenience of everything. A 24/7 town, like being able to go to the grocery store and not have to travel, miles and miles away. Like there was a small Chinatown that was building out here, with 99 Ranch as the first supermarket for all that, and all the diversity with the restaurants. Like you weren't able to just say, oh, I want to go to a Chinese restaurant or a Vietnamese restaurant or a Korean restaurant or anything in Alabama at the time. Like for the most part, if you had that cuisine, you had it because your parents taught you that because they were cooking it at home. So here, there's just so many restaurants that you could go to already, even back then. So there were some go-to restaurants that we would, be able to go and have whatever we wanted without having to make everything from scratch. So I think that that was probably the biggest takeaway as we kind of transitioned to Vegas.
Yeah. And so you've done a lot in your career now, but as a kid, what was the dream? Like, so little Aaron, whether it's high school or whatever, like what did you want to be when you grew up?
I mentioned sports, so um, definitely NBA basketball player. As I got older, I realized that hey, that would be cool if I was the first Chinese basketball player to go pro, that type of thing. And then I realized it was more of a recreational thing and for sheer exercise and competition as opposed to actually doing anything to make money with that. So
Yeah. Okay. So when you realized that maybe the NBA wasn't a reality, what were your goal? What did you want to get into then?
I think the honest answer was I wasn't sure. I think I wanted to get into business. So I went to college for business management and got my bachelor's and all that, but it took a long time because you get into the workforce and you try to juggle everything. You try to balance everything out. And, ideally, obviously with Asian parents, they want you to just focus on school, take care of that first, get the degree first, et cetera. But then
Yeah.
you create these bills for yourself, right? You have, you want to get a car, you have car payments, car insurance, you want to buy nice things. I was always into sneakers. So it was saving lunch money to working for, waiting in line for sneakers and stuff like that. So those are very vivid memories for me to kind of just think, okay, well, let's see where this goes. And then obviously just juggling that with a lot of hospitality business operations, specifically restaurants and hotel.
Yeah. So let's get into that a little bit. So, um, how did you fall into it? You kind of made a name. You have a lot of experience, and I'm guessing that's how it helped you transition to what you do now. But how was that? Like, how did you fall into it, and what made you progress and continue to grow in that field?
I think by default, in a way, my very first job was Panda Express. And the reason why was I was like, oh, it's Chinese food. I could do this. I know the food. I could learn, how to fall in line with the rest of the team and all that. But I remember going in to get the application and, telling my parents that, hey, I want to just kind of work part time as we finish up high school, et cetera. And I remember walking in and I saw the manager at the time and he was speaking Cantonese on the phone. And so I picked that up right away. So when I asked for the application, I remember asking him in Cantonese. And from there, he was like, can you start tomorrow? So, he didn't even care if I had any experience. So, I mean, it's really true. Asians really stick together, no matter our ethnicity, like it doesn't matter Filipino, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, etc. We kind of, we feel like we're the underdogs, so we have to look out for each other.
Hmm.
So that was my first job. But, like as I kind of went on, the Mirage Hotel, I have to mention because it's no longer here, but that was my first hotel job. And, working in the hotel and learning those operations and seeing the absorbent amount of tourism and money that flows through these places, right? Like the restaurants and the shows and all this stuff. I gravitated towards that and eventually just kind of went into, restaurants. So from casual restaurants to gourmet restaurants to fine dining, to management, that was my path. So
Yep.
that very first restaurant job, I was a bus person. And I got really good at it, and worked my way up to food serving and management. And then eventually the last hotel position that I had, I was a butler, at Wynn and Encore. So you're dealing with a lot of high end clientele, a lot of personalities, a lot of needs, requests, very specific. So you're ultimately handling what they need, but you have kind of like, a systematic approach where you have to take very detailed notes. So if you had a guest that was allergic to something, or if you had, a guest that was traveling with their family and you needed to know, like everything, the kids' names, who was with them, et cetera, and I pay a lot of what I've been able to accomplish since then has a lot to do with that particular position. That was like the next level service. We're talking white glove service. You're checking the suites and the villas before the guests check in. very detail oriented. And whether they were winning or losing, if they gambled or what have you, you still had to maintain service standards. So you weren't always going to make the money, but you always had to transition your way to make sure that you execute and take care of the tasks at hand, whether they're in the gaming quarters or whether you're serving them in a private dining setting or if you're in the villa with them, because that's where they're staying while they're with us.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that detailed oriented approach, I kind of fine tuned it with that position. And then ultimately had some colleagues of mine that I worked with in restaurants prior that reached out and asked if I would take a stab at distribution because there was a local distributor that was looking for someone that possibly spoke Chinese that would be able to help them with distribution for beverages. So then I thought that was a little bit more of a stable opportunity as far as income. At that time, we just had our first child. And so I wanted to have something that was a little bit more stable as far as not just relying on gratuities and tips.
Right.
So I took a chance on it, and that was at the time Works Beverage. It's since then been rebranded as Breakthrough Beverage. They're the second largest here in the state, and they had a multicultural, portfolio. So Chinese, Japanese beverages. At the time that they wanted me to learn that portfolio and help them on the streets. And, it worked out pretty smoothly because my father is a retired chef. So he knew a lot of the industry, within, the culture of Chinese cuisine. So he was able to give me some leads or put in a good word for me if I went to visit certain spaces and was able to capture at least some percentage of that business right away. And then just kind of build my way up. So then you kind of fast forward through that. Eventually worked for Southern Glaciers, which is the largest in the nation, with a significant Asian portfolio as well. And then the pandemic hit, and that was kind of the turning point for me to really determine if the distribution game was always going to be there. We're living in Vegas. There's no shortage of alcohol really in general, but with Asian beverage, it's a niche. It's a very specific clientele, very specific set of accounts. So that's when I decided, as the world was shut down, I decided to apply for the licensing for distribution and wait that out and find a warehouse and resign from my position prior to that, et cetera. So
tell us a little bit about that decision making, right? So some would say like you had a very, like, I don't want to call it cushy because you see how to build relationships to do those things, but yet you're working for the biggest alcohol distributor in the nation. And then so what was it that made you decide I can do this on my own, or I want to do this on my own? Like, what was kind of that tipping point?
I think the beauty of it, since I got into the distribution side of things, was the Asian portfolio was wanted, but not necessarily always needed. So a lot of the tasks, you weren't able to delegate that to someone else to help. You kind of had to take on those tasks yourself. Meaning if we needed something as far as logistics, if we needed something with pricing, if we were trying to acquire new brands, if we were trying to execute staff trainings and things like that, I couldn't send anybody out there to actually execute that for me. I had to do it. So I was running around the whole city. So that gave me the confidence that I knew if I had to do this all on my own, I'm technically already doing it on my own.
Right.
It would just be more intense because now you're handling your own funds and you don't have a big company to fall back on as far as their funding and their budgets for expenses and what have you. So, it was a difficult decision because I was the director of the Asian portfolio at Southern. And I knew that there was opportunity to continue growing. I knew that, they were listening to me as far as the portfolio and the direction that portfolio was going. But then the pandemic hit and all that, was on pause. And everybody was downsizing, scaling back on their portfolio and cutting brands. And when I saw that happening, I knew that I could capture all these brands and house them in my own distribution. and help a lot of the small brands grow. Obviously the larger brands, we're in a franchise state, so they can't just kind of come and go. But all the large brands are locked in, but all the craft brands would need attention. They need to be nurtured. Nobody's calling and saying, "Oh, do you have this? Okay, cool. Ship it to me." They're more or less calling and saying, "Oh, Aaron, this looks really interesting. Can you tell me more about it? Can we taste it? Can we schedule a meeting?" And you create relationships with the individuals, right? It's a testament to the business. Yes, you have competition within the distributors to have the best pricing, the best brands and things like that. But if you have the relationship, I think that trumps everything. If you have the relationship, if my products come in, if my sake comes in $5-10 higher than everybody else's, I'm still capturing that business because those folks want to work with me. And they know that they have my support. They know that they can contact me at any hour of the day. Again, this kind of goes back to the butler position. You're on call, like it doesn't matter what time of day it is. Your manager might call you and say, "Hey, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, had some type of dish that you offered them or had a cigar that you offered them. Can you tell us what that is?" And they could be calling while you're at home, so, that was wired into me. By fault at times, it's tough to say, but I work around the clock. You have to realize that some of these restaurants, they finish service, and by the time they're doing any type of housekeeping or paperwork, it might be midnight or 1 a.m. Well, that might be fresh on their mind to ask about inventory or ask about a product or what have you. And if I'm up, I'm answering. So I was able to capture a lot of that business and relationship building prior. So as we kind of went through the process of doing this on our own, I knew I was capable. But obviously, just like, leaving Vietnam and having everything have to fall in place, there's a lot of moving parts that have to fall in place and have to continue to fall in place for us to succeed.
Yeah, it's amazing what you're doing, and I think it's also it's a kind of a microcosm of to like how even just minorities, not even Asian-owned businesses, but even just minority-owned businesses, oftentimes in this capitalist society, not to make this like super controversial, whatever, but is oftentimes it's an add-on, right? And what you're doing shows people that no, it's not an add-on. There's an actual opportunity to grow this business. And what you're doing is not only elevating yourself, but you're elevating these smaller mom and pop restaurants and these smaller chain restaurants and these boutique brands that are of sakes and like these Asian brands that maybe he would not have had that opportunity otherwise. So like, that's fantastic. And thank you for doing that. Cause that's just amazing, kind of lifting each other up. Like you said earlier, Asians stick together, but it's not even necessarily about that. It's also about lifting up and giving people opportunity to be successful. Like to your point, if a mom and pop owner is up at 1 a.m., this is their baby too. And so they just need some help with nurturing their baby. And if you're there to provide that help, then so be it, right? Like that's a great opportunity for you and for them.
You have to be humble in your approach, but you're helping, the mass community kind of reassure them of their approach. They took a chance on opening their own business as well, right? So, we have business with a lot of small operations. We have business with the hotels. Obviously, again, it's the same concept, right? If you are in a hotel, and yes, there's stress and a commitment there's a level to that, right? But if you own it yourself, that's another level in and of itself. Right. I go to bed thinking about this business. I go to bed thinking about what I have to do tomorrow, what I have to do to succeed, because I can't tell somebody else to go and do that for me, or I can't buy the time and say, I'm going to take a break from this and we'll figure this out. We're highly competitive, but there's a very calculated approach for us. And I think that the way that I build the relationships and I earn the friendships, I think that that's the most valuable. Mm-hmm. Because if an account calls and asks me about a brand and I don't carry that brand, I don't just push them away. I tell them where they can find that brand, because I've handled all these brands in the market here. So I'll tell them where they can find that. but I'll also reassure them that they could trust me. So it's not about, let me just shove my brands down their throat.
Right.
It's more, they know that they can call me for advice. They know that they can call me for suggestions. And guess what? In return, at some point, whether it's the next day or whether the next month or the next year, I'll earn additional business from them because they'll trust me enough to send that my way. So, that's just always been my approach. And I've been as consistent as possible with that. Just to, build the relationships first. And everything else will kind of take care of itself.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um, so what were like want to get into some of the challenges that you faced. So you knew this industry well. I mean, one of the challenges is to your point, like you have nothing to fall back on. Like if it's all on you, if something happens, you don't have this big company behind you. But what were some of the other challenges that you had to face in building this business? Because it couldn't be all puppy dogs and rainbows for sure.
Oh no, definitely not. Definitely not. You can't, well, first and foremost, I couldn't apply for a license until I had an actual physical location. So I had to be aggressive in finding the proper location, but negotiating the terms so at least they could buy me enough time to, whether it's abated rent or what have
Hmm.
you, to get it going. Um, and I was fortunate enough, to work with a company that was able to share that vision, even if it was a small percentage. They saw that, these things would have to fall in place for me to be able to execute the business. Um, so we were able to do that, but, procuring a portfolio wasn't massively challenging, but you want to have substance, right? You don't want to just have 5, 10 brands and then, you might as well consult for, those companies if you're going to do that and have less overhead and
Right.
just kind of help them build and, nurture those brands. But the reality to that is you also have to work back to wherever that product is distributed. So you can initiate a deal, but you can't necessarily always close that deal. So if I'm the distributor, I can initiate the deal and I can close the deal because if they're buying it, they have to purchase it from us. So, building that portfolio is, slowly and steadily becoming more challenging because you were taking chances on brands that you didn't necessarily know entirely well. Obviously the ones that I did, I very rarely have any type of obstacle with them,
Hmm.
some hiccups here and there, but we're able to work through them. But when you're taking a chance on brands that are trying to get into this market, the reality is there's not any alcohol brand, and it doesn't have to be Asian. It can be anything in the world. Everybody wants to have distribution in Vegas, because they see it as a tourism, staple. They see all the opportunities, all the diversity, all the restaurants, all the hotels,
Right.
all the retailers, and things like that. But not all of them understand what it takes to actually build the business. And if they're just going to try to drop their brands with a distributor and hope that that distributor is going to do the heavy lifting, well, our hope is that at least it works out in all fairness for everyone, right? So, when you identify that that's not the case, I think that that's one of the bigger obstacles that I've faced, to realize that you get a call when, you know, invoice is due, or, they're asking how many accounts did you visit, but they're not actually visiting the market and trying to help you in the
Right.
marketplace. Again, it's me. I have a staff, a very loyal staff that I appreciate dearly, that handles all my deliveries and handles all that execution within the warehouse. Um, but when you're talking about actually going out and executing and, promoting the business and calling for those meetings and, trying to get the sale and try to schedule staff training and all these things, that's still me.
Yeah.
So if you have the suppliers that are willing to support, then that makes it a lot easier, because they can come in and they can take that burden away a little bit and focus on their brands and help expand that. But,
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of the main challenges that's still, a ever ongoing type of thing. Um, I've been fortunate enough to facilitate a very strong crew. Um, my guys, they go to bat for me every day, and I know that they handle everything as far as execution. But for me to handle everything else to actually, attain those orders, that's the biggest challenge. But I was on that island before,
Yeah.
with the larger companies. So now I don't have the outside noise of saying, "Hey, Aaron, can you help us with some of these one-off brands?" I could focus on what we have in the building and try to build within.
Yeah.
But yeah, the overhead is massive. We have, a good amount of inventory on site. And you're constantly trying to cycle through and build opportunities with, new openings and things like that, and trying to be first, instead of last, because once a hotel venue prints their menu, it takes a little bit of time for them to consider to reprint it.
Right. Right.
So you kind of have to get to them before they do all that. Um, Otherwise, you kind of have to wait your turn until they're ready to make that adjustment, and then you have an opportunity to sell to them again.
Yeah. Um, okay. So thank you for walking us through your business. Now I want to get into advice. So for professionals, and you can take this how you are, you whichever one you want to. So for young Asian professionals, what advice would you give your younger self, or ones that are maybe in jobs that are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs like yourself? So what advice would you give those folks that are maybe like on the bubble, on the fence, or unsure of where to go? Like maybe when you were in college, like when I asked you what was a dream, you're like, I didn't know, just kind of started working. So what advice did you have for them?
I think ultimately I think you have to be honest with yourself. I think a lot of times, especially again, Asian culture, right? You kind of force fed that you have to have direction. You kind of have to know, like, whether you want to get into nursing or hospitality or et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
You're kind of taught that at a young age, especially for Asian families, right? But you have to be honest with yourself. If you don't know, you don't know. And it's okay to try different things until you figure out if you really know or not. And I think that that's the biggest thing, to kind of absorb, take on the opportunities and gravitate towards those opportunities to learn. Um, like it's like restaurants, right? Like if you want to work for a restaurant, you're thinking, oh, I want to serve because that's where all the tips are, and I'm in control of, what I make that night, and I tip out to the bartender, or I tip out to the bus person or the food runner. Um, but you have to work your way to that position. Um, you cannot just go into a fine dining establishment and say, "Hey, I've kind of studied this
YouTube or
through,
something.
researching it
Yeah.
online or what have you, and how to carry a tray, etc." Right? Um, or a chef, right? Like nowadays, you can go on YouTube and learn how to make something, but that doesn't mean
Hmm.
that you would be able to execute that by the masses, right? We're talking cooking dinner at home versus cooking for hundreds of guests on a nightly basis, two different things. But um, you have to humble yourself and start from scratch, and that's what I was fortunate enough to be able to see that and say, hey, okay, I'm gonna bus tables. That's cool. I'll learn that, and then let's see where that takes me. So from bussing tables to food running to food server to management. Um, you kind of have to know that there's stepping stones, and you don't want to run before you walk. Um, and my mentality with the business is there's so much to be had, and these larger distributors have most of it, right? But I'm okay with taking crumbs
Right.
until I could turn those into slices, and the slices turn into loaves, right? I don't have to look at it as I was able to I was able to benefit from having the loaves before working for the larger distributors. So if I'm opening this on my own, I need to start from there. That's not how I looked at it. I looked at it as I'm going to take these crumbs until I pretty much become a nuisance to all the competitors, because they're tired of losing share to me and wondering why Aaron still gets these meetings when we're the largest ones out on the street, right? That's the competitor in me. So I think, like it's okay to go about your ways, the way that you're taught. But I think that if you are able to capture that, earlier than later, I think that it's beneficial as you kind of become more refined in anything that you do.
That's great advice. I mean, there's to your point earlier, typical Asian families, it's like, are you going to be a nurse, a doctor, a lawyer, engineer, right? Um, but you're not the first to say it, and I think people should really take that to heart. Is figure out what it is that you enjoy doing, because I also have friends who picked something that where they were forced into and then just hate their job, and they've been doing it for 20, 25 years, right? Like if you don't like what you do, how long are you going to do it for?
hmm And then you lose out on all that time for you to kind of reinvent yourself. It's not that it's not possible. Anything is possible, but the sooner that you can identify that, the better off you are, because then you can at least, have that in your tool belt and be a jack of all trades, or, kind of think outside your comfort zone as well. Like with this type of business, obviously there's a lot of public speaking to some effect, right? Like I'm doing staff trainings for opening teams for restaurants. I did staff trainings for hundreds that you needed a microphone to speak to them and teach them about sake and things like that. And those are things that you learn at an early age if you're capable or not, or if you want to or not. And then if you know the content, right? If you know the content, it's a lot easier for me to go up there and speak on behalf of that, as opposed to if you're walking into a room and you don't know what the topic or the subject matter is and you're just trying to wing it. You don't want to be that person.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we got to wrap up here. So how can people find you, get a hold of you? Are there any events that are going on? Like if people want to get in touch with you, like how do people learn more about Tian distribution? And do you make your own sake or anything that people can get their hands on?
I don't make my own yet. We'll see. We'll see if if that comes into play down the line here. I've always been interested just from travel and handling at breweries and stuff like that. It's super interesting to see. But tianbeverage.com, that's our website, TIAN beverage.com. You can see a lot of our backstory there. Our secondary business is Bottles and Boxes. So it's an LLC that we use to promote education and to cater and do on and off-site festivals and events. So we rent event space out. We tag team with a lot of the local businesses that are doing different functions and events and things like that. So we work with a lot of different groups here in town. Because the reality is with that is, if you're hosting an event, two of the things that you need that are most important are food and beverage. So
Right.
from the beverage aspect, the next question would be, do you want just non-alcs, or do you want to have some alcohol? Do you want to have some low ABV or beer or wine or sake or spirits, cocktails, etc.? So we're able to kind of put that together. I'm on Instagram. Bottles Boxes is my personal Instagram. And then Tian_beverage is also on Instagram as well for distribution inquiries and kind of taking a look at what we have to offer currently in our portfolio and things like that.
Cool. And we'll if you didn't write it down, don't worry. We'll link all those links in the show notes. So we'll make sure you'll be able to get to Aaron's website, his Instagram, and the business links as well. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Aaron, for taking your time to be with us today, to walk us through your story. It's amazing. Hopefully I get to run into you soon and do some tastings and and we'll hang out. And I appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you, Rico. Yeah, keep going. I appreciate the things that you're doing and the individuals that you're trying to connect with. So I definitely look forward to sharing a drink with you, whether it's a non-alcoholic drink or an alcoholic drink. There's no peer pressure here.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be a coffee or a martini. I'm good either way.
Okay, fair.
All right. All right. Thanks, Aaron. Everyone, take care. That was another episode of the AAPI Leadership Lab. We will see you next time.